It can be really frustrating when you delegate a task or hand off a responsibility and the other person just doesn't do it the way that you wanted them to. But when this happens, the problem usually isn't the other person. It's actually the way that you delegated. So today, I'm going to share my 5 approaches to delegation so that you can hand off tasks with confidence every time. And before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. New content is published every week. Now let's get to it. I used to think that delegating meant giving someone an assignment and then just letting them have at it. But I have learned the hard way that that approach to delegating can be amazing when it works well, and it can be disastrous when it doesn't. And over time, through personal experience and research, I've identified that there are actually 5 approaches to delegating, of which giving complete ownership to someone is only one. And now, by having these 5 different approaches in my toolbox, I'm able to make sure that I'm setting the other person up for success every time. So these are the 5 S's: set free, sandbox, scaffold, safety net, and section. So starting with the most responsibility that you're handing over, I call this one set free. This is just what I mentioned, where you explain the high-level task, project, goal, or result that you're looking for, and then set the person free to get it done pretty much whenever, however, whatever it is they want to do to get it done, however they choose. This means that basically any information or direction that you don't provide is really up to them. They have total ownership and freedom and decision-making to strategize, plan, and execute the work. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't get any input or you don't have any role to play, but you're just truly empowering them to take the reins and run. I had a colleague who was constantly impressing me with what she would produce. And over time, I started giving her less and less instructions and guidance and more freedom until I was pretty much just straight up saying, here you go, using that set free approach. I remember one time when I wanted to really up my game as a podcast guest. And I asked her to put together a little press kit for me that I could send to podcasts that I wanted to be a guest on. Well, when she sent me the folder with all the materials, I literally could not have been happier. Like, seriously, it was better than anything I could have imagined. And I was so grateful in that moment that I didn't bog her down with my ideas of what it should be. So this approach of set free works really well when you've got deep trust in the other person, which usually comes from having worked with them for a long time. Now, you have to have a solid sense of what they're capable of and truly trust and believe that they will ask for support or guidance when and if they need it. You might have experienced this type of delegation at some point in your career, because I often hear stories like this. And even from my podcast guests, when I ask them about a great boss or manager they've had, they tell me things like, I had a boss who said, all right, you're in charge of this. I trust you to just get it done. And many of those guests admit to feeling inadequate in that moment and wondering, why did their boss just hand them such a daunting responsibility? Some even push back on their bosses, saying the assignment was too big for them. But at the end of the day, the boss was right. They saw something in this person, some potential combined with their existing strengths, and the boss had faith that with a little nudge, this person could really step up. Now, there are times when you will need to do that, when you have got a strong feeling that someone is ready for more, even if they don't believe it themselves. And there will be times when you're the one that's afraid of letting go of control, even if the other person is ready. There is a fine line between waiting till someone is really ready and waiting too long. And when you wait, especially when you wait too long, you risk that the other person is going to feel stifled or underutilized. And when it's your own fear that's holding you back from that set-free approach, you may never actually get past it because our fears are real. And you might always feel like that person needs just a little more experience, a little more knowledge, a little more skill, a little more anything. And at the same time, if you delegate full ownership too early, you also risk creating problems because that can be extremely stressful and even create a sense of helplessness for the other person. Not to mention the fact that the project could just go totally off. So let me just digress for a little second here. And I want to give you some background on this relationship between our skills and the difficulty of the task that we're tackling. So to try to keep this really simple, when our capability easily exceeds the task that we are doing, We're basically in the boredom zone. Something's super easy to do, just doesn't excite us. Now, when our capability meets what's required of the task, we're in what's called the safe zone. Here's where we feel confident, which is usually a good thing, but staying in this safety zone for too long can actually start to feel a little dull for people. Now, when the challenge appropriately exceeds our capability, we're in what's called the growth or learning zone. And here, we're engaged in the challenge and we are stretching to accomplish it. But if that challenge far exceeds our capacity, then we enter the stress or anxiety zone. And this is where we feel incapable and often helpless. And we don't want our team members to feel incapable or helpless, especially given the fact that they may feel already a little bit of extra stress by wanting to impress us as their boss or not let us down. And the thing is that when you're in this growth zone, that cheerleading that you might do as the boss, I know you can do this, I'm here to support you, that can give them exactly the confidence boost that they need to really go for it. But if someone's in the anxiety zone, that same cheerleading just makes them feel worse. And I know this because not only does research say it, but I have felt this. I've had moments where I feel like that imposter syndrome and that inner critic is just on fire. Clearly, if this other person thinks I can do this, they don't really know me. I must have been fooling them this whole time into thinking I could do something. I'm thinking I'm better than I am. And now they're going to see the real me. Or like, who am I kidding? I don't have what it takes to deliver this. I am going to embarrass myself and then I'm going to embarrass the other person. It doesn't feel good. Now, trying to do big, important work from a place of stress and fear is not a good thing. Our brains are most capable and creative when we're in that relaxed state or that slightly aroused state where we need just enough stress to kick us into gear, not so much stress that it keeps us from getting off the starting block. So, if using the set-free approach feels like too much, you have 4 other approaches that are available, starting with Sandbox. Here, you're constructing a sandbox and then letting the other person play within it. This could look like providing a timeline or a budget and key metrics that need to get met, but then letting the person have as much leeway as possible within those parameters. You've established that sandbox, those parameters, that guidance, and then within that, pretty much anything is acceptable. Now, I really like this approach, and I worked with a manager who used it when they were trying to get their team onto a shared task system. She asked one of her team members, who's a little more tech savvy than she is, to make a recommendation. Now, if she had just left it at that, I'd say it was a type of setting free, but she didn't. She set a budget of cost per user. She explained that the tool had to integrate with their CRM. It must pass the company's internet and privacy and security requirements. And it needed to allow for different levels of access, like private projects and guests from the outside joining, because they worked with a lot of contractors. She didn't spell out everything, but she did identify those critical factors. And then beyond that, she empowered her colleague to use their best judgment. The sandbox approach is really great for when the other person is close to being able to fully take over, but either you've got some critical information and vision that needs to be part of the project, or you're still maybe assessing the other person and trying to get a sense of what they're capable of, or maybe they need a little stretching, and so you're there to support them as they further develop their skills. Next up is what I call safety nets. The safety net approach is where you maintain some checks and balances to ensure that nothing goes totally wrong. This can look like being the final decider, which is what just happened with the manager I mentioned. When she took the sandbox strategy, she also asked for a recommendation, not a decision, which meant that she could, if for whatever reason she disagreed with the recommendation, she could intervene before they signed up for an annual contract. Safety nets can also look like having a meeting to review or practice a presentation before the person does it live in front of the client. Or it could look like reading over a draft before it gets published. It could even look like asking for a project plan before the person gets started to make sure they aren't missing any critical steps and it meets the timeline that you were hoping for. It could also look like just having regular check-ins scheduled to review progress and give you opportunities to provide input. Now, I like safety nets because they provide a lot of autonomy while also giving you some peace of mind. You don't need to worry that there's going to be any issues or surprises because you're going to see things as they're happening or at least before they get done. Safety nets also create opportunities for learning in the sense that you get the opportunity to see what the other person's capable of, and you get the opportunity to give them feedback, which helps them improve going forward. All right, the next approach is scaffolding, which is providing a structure or guideposts that make the task easier for the other person to achieve. One of my favorite scaffolding techniques, which doesn't work for everything, but works for quite a lot, is to record myself doing the task and narrate what I'm doing while I'm doing it. It takes almost no extra time and makes it super easy to pass along all the information that anyone would need to complete that task. Now, I had my assistant take over producing my weekly newsletter, and I made a video showing her how to navigate the software platform, where to pull key information from, what the correct settings were, and I highlighted the pieces where she was going to have to generate new content herself. Scaffolding can look like a lot of different things. It could be handing over a template, a checklist, or a work plan. And for another example, when I ask a team member to do research for me, I often set up the spreadsheet for them so that when the information comes back to me, it's in the structure that I want. I let them know that they can gather the information however they want to, but that when it comes back to me, I want it converted into this format. Now, the thing to be cautious of is to really pay attention to know, is what you're providing as scaffolding actually enabling the person to do the task successfully, or whether it's just how you did it, and therefore you're imposing unnecessary restrictions on them. The final approach is sectioning, which is dividing the larger task or responsibility into smaller sections or components and delegating one or more of them instead of the full thing. For a really big project, you might then take one of those components and still use a sandbox or a scaffolding or a safety net approach. But you can also section things down to a step that's small enough that someone could just take full ownership and through a set-free approach. For example, when I make a new workbook, it consists of 3 basic steps. I draft the content, which is step 1. Then I delegate step 2. I have my team member take what I've written and put it into Canva, into our template. And then lastly, I finish with step 3 by doing a quick edit and then downloading it and saving it to our drive. As you can see, you can use these approaches in combination. You can provide greater autonomy over time by removing or reducing safety nets, reducing or eliminating scaffolding, and building up larger and larger sections. Before you know it, you might even discover that you have completely delegated a major responsibility without even realizing it. Now, if you have found this episode useful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below.